Hello, my name is Laura McGinnis. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the Media Relations Manager for PFLAG National, and this is Something to Talk About Live. And let me bring in the host of today's show, and every show, my colleague Jean Marie Nevada. Hi, Jean Marie.
Hello, Laura. I'm the host of the show that just started existing and just doesn't end.
Well, you're fantastic.
Thank you so much. And hello, everybody, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Jean Marie Nevada, and I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Every single Thursday at this time, we get together to have a conversation. We give ourselves something to talk about. So what we do is we pick an article, we write some questions and make them available to you, and then we invite some friends to come in and talk to us about the article. So today we are having a really fascinating conversation, and it is about the history of, the whole history of reparative therapy and conversion therapy and the treatment of LGBTQ people by the psychiatric community. And a lot of this story is being told in the new film called CURED. And if you're interested in that, that's curedfilm.com. And I'm really excited today because we have an article about the film, but we also have the director and producer of the film and one of the participants. So for those of you who want to join us for the discussion, make sure you look at straightforequality.com/discussion series and you can pick up today's article. And with that, I see that we have Patrick and we may be having some technical problems that we're working on now, but Patrick Salmon, it is so nice to see you. How are you?
It's great to see you too. I'm very well, thank you.
I'm so glad that you can be here. And I know we're trying to get Reverend Kennedy back who is one of the amazing participants in the film. But Patrick, could you, while we're trying to do that, just quickly give people a quick summary of what CURED is about? Because I mean, I give a very top line, but you know it better than anyone.
Sure. CURED is a documentary that tells the story of the 1973 decision by the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from its Manual of Mental Illnesses, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM. And this film is basically a David versus Goliath story about the activists who battled the APA over about a 10-year period to convince the APA to remove homosexuality from this manual. And it had a big impact because as long as gays and lesbians were classified as mentally ill, then business and government used that as an excuse to discriminate. So this story, and when we hear from Reverend Kennedy, you'll see it's really amazing activists who stepped forward at a time when it certainly wasn't easy and really had the courage to confront this huge, formidable institution, and they won. And so this is a very uplifting story that very much lays out some lessons that are very still relevant today about how social change is created.
And Patrick, because a lot of people don't know much about this history, and I think that's what makes this film so fascinating. And I'm just going to say I did watch it, and it's just amazing. And there's so much in it. And to actually hear first person some of these stories is tremendous. But could you talk to people just a little bit, do a little education about, because of how homosexuality was classified, you mentioned that allowed for some very bad things to happen when it came to laws. Can you give people some examples of those? Because I don't think people realize how detrimental this was and the snowball effect that it had.
Sure. So people may be familiar with the Lavender Scare, which was the effort in the 1950s to fire LGBT people from the federal government. And this was one of the excuses where the federal government said, well, we can't hire you. We can't keep you on federal government payroll because you're mentally ill. And these scientists say that. So you're sick. That's one example. Another minuscule example, if you were a taxi driver in New York City and you were LGBT, you had to see a psychiatrist once a year and be certified as someone who was safe to drive a taxi and wouldn't harm their passengers. It was used as an excuse to get rid of, if you had kids and you were found to be gay or lesbian, you could lose the kids over that. So there are a myriad ways of that had real life implications for LGBT people.
Thank you, Patrick, because I think a lot of people don't understand that. And it looks like we got Reverend Magora Kennedy with us, and I'm so excited to see you, Reverend Kennedy. Reverend Kennedy is one of the participants in the film and one of the activists who helped fight what was going on and to really change the course of LGBT history for all of us. And honestly, we all owe a debt of gratitude to people like her. So Reverend Kennedy, we were just talking about what the whole experience of working to change the DSM was like. Could you talk a little bit about what your experience in this whole process was, what brought you into it, and what happened for you? Because a lot of people don't necessarily know your story yet.
Well, I guess the biggest thing was that I think I had expressed this before that June in 1969, everybody had been in the Stonewall Cafe, and it was also that Friday they were having the wake uptown of Judy Garland. So everybody had been in Stonewall, and they were all dressed up, drag kings, drag queens. Everybody was in their finery and went uptown for Judy Garland's wake. In the meantime, the lines were like stretched out around, I guess, almost around the whole area, and it started pouring down rain. So it poured down rain. Everybody got wet, and they went back to the Stonewall Inn to lament on what had happened and how Judy Garland had been mostly, an advocate of the underground, as we were called in those days, and some other unchoice names. And this was the time that the police decided to pull one of their famous raids. What they did was they usually had this sign that said, "This is a raided premises." So when that happened, there were cops inside, and Marsha P. Johnson snatched that sign and ran out of Stonewall. Also, there was a guy who used to come down every weekend to Stonewall, the football player. He got out of Stonewall also and was able to take up a parking meter, that weren't too well grounded, and put it across the door so the cops on the inside could not get on the outside. Of course, in those days, all they had was the walkie-talkies. And by the time they called for backup, people were like, the word had gone around to different bars and people were into the street. And that started like on Friday night. Stormy DeLaveray, who was a bouncer or at Henrietta Hudson's, also came up to the Stonewall. And what happened was the cop slapped her. Thank God the cop didn't punch her, but the story that she got slapped. The cop slapped her and she slapped the cop back. And then that's when everybody just, it was going backwards and forth between the police. It was an uprising. And, a lot of people like to call it a riot. And I always tell people, listen, let me tell you what a riot really was. Look, nobody breaking in stores. Nobody was turning over cars. Nobody was burning anything. People were fighting back against the police. That was on Friday night. On Saturday, that was when names. The other sister joined. Anyway, her and I were chased by the police, and we ran up Christopher Street to Gay Street. When we got in the area, it was a cul-de-sac. So the cops had seen Keepers, her last name is Rivera, but anyway, had seen her and had seen me and thought that I was his words. The cop said, "Oh, there's a faggot imitating a priest," because I was wearing my collar at the time. So when he went to go for his gun, at that time they didn't, the trash cans weren't chained down like they are now. So I grabbed these two trash can covers, was able to hit this policeman upside the head with the trash can covers, and then me and Rivera, we got away and went back into the fray. And we were out that whole weekend until that Monday.
Oh my goodness. So this is sort of a big way to get into activism and to really, to actually have been at Stonewall and to be able to tell these stories. So from Stonewall, we then go into looking at changing the DSM and the work that you did around that. Could you talk a little bit about the work that you did around the DSM and what is talked about in the film Cured? Because I'd love for people to know a little bit about what your experiences were with that process too.
You're talking to me? Oh, yes. I thought you were talking to Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Well, what happened was, as the word went out and we began to, as they say, take it to the streets. And so that whole weekend, everybody was out, and it lasted up until Monday. The whole thing was that people had gotten to the point that they were sick and tired, for lack of anything else, were sick and tired of being sick and tired. They had come to the conclusion that they had rights, and they were beginning to feel strong enough to start to fight back. And so that was actually like the beginning. And then the next year was the very first march that we left the village going up to the sheep meadow. in Central Park. And like when we left the village, there were about 600 or 700 of us marching, up Fifth Avenue on the way to the sheep meadow. When we got to St. Patrick's Cathedral, all of a sudden, all these good Christian Catholics came out. They threw garbage at us, called us all kinds of names. We linked arms and kept marching. By the time we started out with 700 people, by the time we got to the sheep meadow, I think there were about 100 of us, maybe less, because everybody just like really, at that point but we were just determined. Jim Owls organized the very first march that first year. But what was happening was really strange because, like, at that time, Jim Owls got put out of the Communist Party for being gay. People were getting put out of the Socialist Workers' Party for being gay. And then, of course, me and my sons, we were in Black Panther Party. But, again, there was like a witch hunt was going on and all these gay people getting thrown out. Well, I was in the Boston chapter, Black Panther Party. And so I left. I took my kids and we left. I didn't get thrown out or put out or anything like that. I was on my way to take some people up to P-Town, which is Provincetown, which a lot of gay people went in the summertime, especially like teachers and professors and stuff, especially the women went to P-Town, and heard on the radio that there was a disturbance or an uprising. Of course, the guy on the radio, he didn't see it. He felt free to say a bunch of faggots and bulldaggers were fighting in Greenwich Village. So what I did was my friends, I got them to a taxi stand. I paid the taxi driver the money that they gave me, and I told them, get them to P-Town. I'm going back to New York, which I did. I returned to New York, and that's when Sylvia Rivera and I were out that Saturday until that Monday.
Sorry, I muted myself, which is one of the dreams. To be able to mute me. The world dreams of muting me. Patrick, so we have all the stuff that Reverend Kennedy is talking about, this momentum that happened with Stonewall. And, so many of us talk about Stonewall as sort of this modern starting point, although it wasn't the starting point. Can you talk about what happened? Like, how did that momentum from Stonewall then move into this?
Sure. There had been a number of activists before Stonewall, Frank Kameny and Barbara Giddings and Kay LaHusen, and they're all featured in CURED. They had been sort of aware of the importance to challenge the American Psychiatric Association. And the key thing that happened after Stonewall is a whole bunch of new activists joined the fight. And so there was also this uptick in protests. Of course, Reverend Kennedy talked about all the sort of social change movements that were going on during this time period. And so quickly, the gay liberation movement focuses on challenging the APA. And so that's where the sort of fight is joined. And there was a key event starting at the APA convention in 1970 in San Francisco, where activists sort of stormed the stage in San Francisco. And that sort of helped build momentum for this. So regularly, psychiatrists were being challenged at meetings by various activists. And then there was a key thing happening in mass media. And maybe Reverend Kennedy, you could talk about your own sort of important role on the David Susskind show. And that was the late 1971. It was the first time on national TV they had a group of open lesbians talking about their lives. And David Susskind, who was considered a progressive, towed the company line when it came to his view of mental illness. And he thought all of these, the lesbians, women who joined him on stage were all mentally ill. So maybe Reverend Kennedy, you could take it from there and talk about your sort of standing up to David Susskind and the impression you made on him.
Well, one of the things that happened was that when Barbara Giddings and all of us were backstage, I mean, he walked past me. He extended his hand to Barbara Giddings, and I think the thing that really got to me, and I think I forgot to really mention, it got to me most was when he extended his hand out to Barbara Giddings to shake her hand. He then took and wiped his hand on his pants. I was mortified. I was like, and I said, okay, that's all right. We're gonna get him one way or the other. So when we got into the whole panel thing, he was talking about how he thought, everything should be happening between men. And I said, does that really make you feel good to really sit up here and act like we're not here or there's something wrong with us? I think there's something wrong with you. And I got in his face. Well, after that,
Reverend Kennedy, the finger pointing, that was key. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, he was so busy like talking, I said, does it really make you feel good, to talk about it? Like, and I mean, he was just too shook. And so there was no, prompters or anything, and he was like stuttering and carrying on, and then Barbara went into a more elaborate, she had, as they say, she had a little bit more couth than I did.
I have to say that watching you in the film in that clip, it is the very definition of the word fierce, is actually exactly how you handled the situation. It's amazing. So here's the question.
Yeah, because backstage, when we were backstage, we were getting ready to go on. He just walked on past me like I wasn't even there.
I can't. Knowing that backstory and now seeing the clip, it gives you a whole different context for what happened. One of the things that I want to know from both of you, and I'd love to hear both of your opinions, is this is such a fascinating story, and it's a horrible story because people don't realize how damaging this was. Why don't you think more people have heard about this? Why hasn't this story been told more? And why did it frankly take, doing films and really pushing it now that the story's finally being told? Why did it kind of get lost and not told story in our history?
Yeah, I don't really. You know what, Jean Marie? No one's asked that question before. I'd have to think about it. I know a lot about LGBTQ history, and I had sort of was aware of this story. But when I sort of stumbled on it as a documentary idea, which I embarked on it with my co-director Bennett Singer more than 5 years ago, we were both surprised that we didn't understand and recognize its significance. But as soon as we, dived into the story, we realized how significant it was. And then it was so exciting to be able to connect with Reverend Kennedy and other activists who were part of this fight, so that the film has the firsthand recollection. We sort of marry the sort of archival footage of the activists at work and challenging psychiatry, and then to get the present day recollections looking back on it. I'm not really sure why, especially because this story has a happy ending, if you will. This sort of, the good people won, our side won, and it was just obviously the beginning of a fight that is still not over, obviously. But it really propelled other progress throughout the movement.
And I think that one of the things that happened is like back in those days, we would call all kinds of names, street people, whatever. And the whole thing that really, to me, and I just thought about this, Patrick, lately. I'm 82 years old, so I think about things and it comes and I should write it down. But the interesting thing about all of this is, do you realize these were transgender people that really fought back? Marsha P. Johnson, Stormy DeLoveray, and Sylvia Rivera. Those three. That was the start. And, I just give thanks and praise I'm still here to tell that story. Because unfortunately, no offense to y'all, but like when that weekend, there was very little salt in the pepper, as I call it. In other words, there's very few white people. Everybody out there that Friday and Saturday night was mostly people of color. And so over the 50 years, the story got whiter and whiter. And I'm like, wait a minute. No. It didn't happen like that. And one of the things, I don't know if you can see my back wall there, I got, they presented me with a flag for Stonewall 25 years. And then the other thing I have a crown that I received from some of the people in the movement. And then last year for 51, and at the 50 years, 2019 was 50 years, and I received a banner.
Reverend Kennedy, I want to
in fact, like I want to show it to you. So since I'm using my phone, I can move up, kind of move around a little bit. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question while you're moving. What I'd like to know is, as you look at all of the LGBT activism that's happening today, how does it feel after all of the years and all of the contributions that you have made and the people that you fought along? Are you happy about where we are? Do you feel like there's still a lot more work to go?
Well, I'm very, very. This is what I received for Stonewall 25. I don't know if you can see that.
A pink tiara.
Yeah. That was from Stonewall 25. I received this banner, which I can wear for Stonewall 50. So I'm very proud of those.
As you should be.
I think one of the things that happened, so many things that sprang up out of that started there and over the years have been so beautiful. The thing of marriage equality, the fact that when marriage equality or same-sex marriage was signed into law in the state of New York, it was shown all over the world. And I didn't know that, but I have a son that is the same age as Reverend Al Sharpton, lives in Australia. And he called and was saying, Mama, they showed Governor Cuomo signing same-sex marriage into law in the state of New York. And I was like, wow, I was like over the moon. I was like, yeah, that's as it should be, because it all started here in 1969. I was bragging rights. But
you actually get to say you were there.
And then a lot of people in Australia, when he was telling them that, my son, his name is Gordon Dixon, and he's with athletics in Melbourne, Australia. But when he was telling him that I was his mother, nobody believed him. I told him, I said, tell you what you do. You go to the gay community over there and tell them, give me fare, pay my way round trip, give me an honorarium. I'll come tell the story and talk about you and the rest of my kids.
So are you
tell everybody I'm the gayest great-great-grandmother out the closet.
The great-grandma out of the closet. So are you excited?
Great-great-grandmother. I have 15 grandchildren and 17 great-grandchildren.
Oh my goodness.
I have now 2 great-great-grandkids.
Oh my goodness.
Uh-huh.
Fantastic. Patrick, when you look at stories like Reverend Kennedy and what she did as part of this, and you look at the different actors who were, all the different people who were part of this, what do you think we can be doing to elevate their stories more? Obviously, we want people to see films like Cured.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's been a lot more conversation about LGBT history lately, and that's really exciting. But what more is there? And what kind of things do you suggest? Because you are a storyteller. I want to hear what you think. And then Reverend Kennedy, we could check in with you too on that.
Well, I think a couple of things is, I think, look for platforms to elevate their voices so they can, share their stories and, the recollections. And I think one of the, this has been a tough year, but one of the things that we've all discovered is connecting virtually. Not everything has to be sort of broadcast in the same. You don't have to have necessarily a meeting room where everyone has to come there and you bring in a speaker and fly them in or raise the money for all of that. So the virtual landscape actually offers an incredible opportunity to have voices connect directly to share stories. And I think the other thing we have to remind people, I always loved history in school from my earliest age. I remember my parents telling me old stories from their childhoods. I was always fascinated by it. And some people aren't. But I think maybe the way to make people more interested is to remind people that the stories from the past are relevant to today. And that's certainly what we see with Cured, because the lessons from this fight are very relevant to the ongoing fights. And one of the things that was essential to the victory that was achieved in challenging the American Psychiatric Association was that insiders and outsiders were both involved in the fight. And that's the same way our movement is today. You had people like Reverend Kennedy who were outsiders, who were challenging the establishment, but you also had the insiders who were sort of navigating the halls of power within the APA. And you really needed both of those, because the outside activism wouldn't have been enough to convince the insiders within the APA, and vice versa. So that hand in glove, and those two sides don't always get along. They don't always speak to each other, but both of those pieces of the equation are essential to continuing progress.
I love that. And I love the fact that we are starting to hear all of these different sides of the people who were involved in it, because often it is just the mainstream story, the people who felt like they did it. But I think it's exciting that we actually have this, history is almost becoming more like a dialogue in many cases. Mm-hmm. We have this opportunity because so many of our activists and people who did it are still with us, like Reverend Kennedy. So Reverend Kennedy, I want to ask you just one more question, which is, as you look around and see all of this activism happening around you, are we where you thought we'd be by now? You've seen so much, you've participated in so much, you've done a lot. Have we made the progress that you think we should have made? Do you think there's a lot more work for us to do? How are we doing? And go ahead.
Can you hear
yes.
me? Oh, I believe that, yes, we've come a long way. 50 years, 51 years later, here we are, and we still have a long way to go. It's a learning process, and I think that as more people begin to hear us that are still here, and in other words, it's like they have a saying in Africa about what they call a Lulu bird. The bird is always looking backwards to see where it's come from in order to know where it's going in the future. So I think that's where we are today, and I think it's most important that the young people, especially the young people, because even to this day, here we are in the 21st century of 2020, and there's still young gay people that get thrown out of their homes because they're gay. Some of them are kids. I mean, like I can kind of identify with the fact that I knew when I was like 8, 9 years old that girls were much more favorable to me than boys. So I can imagine what a lot of young people are going through that are in their, starting in what they call their tweens, when they're 10, 11, 12, and they're getting to that point of where they know they are different, and yet still the family is worried about, what the neighbors are going to say, or the fathers with boys, want to practically kill them because they want to wear makeup. And harping back to that, my family, I was born in Albany, New York, and raised up in Saratoga Springs. And my mother signed papers for me to get married at 14 years of age to try to so-called cure me. Well, she almost went to jail for that. But anyway, in the state of New York, that was illegal and the marriage was annulled, although it was consummated. Yeah. And then finally, I got enough courage to tell her all I knew how to do was sing and dance. So, my formal education went as far as the 7th grade. But, however, Skidmore College was a college that was considered Ivy League for women. So I had a chance to go over to the Lucy Scribner Library, and that's how I educated myself. And because of that, through the years, my mother was worried about what the boys were going to think because I had 5 boys. And I said, well, they can get their education. And if my lifestyle is unpleasant to them, when they get 18 years old, there's the door. But right now, it's my way or the highway. The result of it is, like I said, I got 15 grandchildren, 17 great-grands, and the 2 great-great-grandchildren. So, evidently everybody was,
Laura, I'm going to just see if you can pop back in for a second. We only have a few minutes left, but we've had a whole lot of comments, and I was wondering if you might be able to share a few of them with us, because I think it's worth mentioning some of what people have been saying.
This has been such a fantastic conversation, and thank you, Reverend Kennedy and Patrick, for telling these stories and making sure that the rest of us can really engage with them and continue to learn our history. So that's actually a lot of what we've seen in our comments throughout the whole broadcast, is a little bit of jaw drop of like, wow, this is a very cool discussion. So let's see, we have, and I think I might have brought this up earlier in the stream, but John Kelly Poorman posted, the reason why these stories are coming out now is because LGBTQ plus people are more open, and we crave these stories. Yeah. But it's even a little bit more than that. You have both talked about the changing tides, and maybe Patrick, can you highlight a little bit about, was it as easy as that to get this film made? And
yeah, no, it was a 5.5-year effort, and I want to thank lots of generous donors made this film possible. People like Reverend Kennedy were amazingly helpful in sharing their stories. I also want to give acknowledgement to the Independent Television Service, which is funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They put in a big chunk of the funding, and really without them, we couldn't have made this. So the film will be nationally broadcast on PBS next October. Before that, my colleague Bennett Singer and I will be doing a bunch of virtual screenings with various organizations and all around the country. So we're really looking in the lead up to the PBS broadcast to engage in conversations like this with organizations all around the country.
I throw in a plug.
Sure.
Okay, one of the things that we did last year before COVID was in Brooklyn. They did documentary from those of us that belong to Sage called "Not 1 Second More," and they
Yes.
was talking about those of us that were elders and some of us that were involved in the movement. There's a book coming out. I should be receiving any day now because this was about 3 weeks ago. She said the book will be out in about 7 weeks. Also, I'm working on a book called Shades of Stonewall, which tells the story, and I really hope to have it done by Gay Pride this year. So those are the two things that we're well, I'm excited about.
I'm going to invite you back to talk about it, Reverend Kennedy. So
Okay.
we have to wrap up. I want to thank you both. Reverend Kennedy, thank you so much. It was such an honor getting to interview you. And Patrick, thank you so much for your work on this incredible film. I appreciate you both so much. Thank you so, so much. And everybody, we have to wrap up. We will be back one more time this year. Next week, we are talking queer Jews, and we are having two fantastic guests. It's going to be a really fun conversation. So as we say every week, first of all, if you need help, please visit us at pflag.org. Please do what we always suggest every week, which is to run fast, to laugh hard, and to most of all, be kind. And as we remind everybody, please continue to wear your masks. My name is Jean Marie Navetta, and we will be back next week with Something to Talk About Live. Bye, everybody.